So I'd like to welcome to the TXG channel someone who is not a stranger, and that is Chris Voshall of Mizuno Golf. Chris, welcome to the show today.
I love it. Thank you so much for having me. It's some exciting stuff around TXG lately, so it's always fun to talk to this crowd.
Yeah, and that's, there's a very specific reason why we wanted to have you on today. And, there's some other things we're going to get into because, I have a lot of deep dive questions that I just really can't help myself with anytime I get the chance to talk to you. But that is that the STZ driver won the TXG 2021 driver bracket. And, it's contended in the past. Other drivers have contended in the past, but this year it was the winner. Big Bomber Matt made it the winner with a lot of great swings with a lot of great drivers, but it did come out on top. So with that in mind, you've told some of the story in the past about the development of the newest line of drivers, but can you really dive back into that again for us?
Yeah, absolutely. The first thing I want to say though is what an exciting match to watch, where it's funny how I guess I've seen people watch people play video games online and never understood the fascination to that. But I guess to a golfer, watching Matt hit bombs online has become that my version of that, where it was absolutely a thrill to watch. And it's funny how he makes it so exciting, because it was. And granted, I guess I had a little bit more to be excited about than some others, but it was actually really, really, really fun to watch. So no, we're so excited about how the club did and all the testing and just everything that they had to say about it was great. But to your point, it goes a lot to what has happened over the last number of years with how Mizuno has developed woods and how things have changed. So, I mean, I'll start just by saying that this wood isn't just a singular development. It's not like we just made this wood on its own, ignoring anything else. This has been a work in progress over a number of years, and really starting back on, I'll call it the ST190 as the foundation that we built upon to make the STZ, where we really drew a line in the sand to say, okay, here's how we want to start going about making woods, and here's how we're going to work our development process to always be taking this foundation and then building upon it to try to create something grander at the end, rather than just looking at each individual product as a finish line. We looked at each product as almost like a stake in the sand, working your way to the next one, like you're climbing Mount Everest. This is our next camp, working our way up there. And the STZ is the perfect example of that. It's almost like the culmination of 3 years of development to get to a product that, I mean, it kicked ass. So
yeah, and that really is, I think, something that you would be willing to maybe admit, since it's about, it almost feels like in some cases it was like, and Mizuno's been responsible for a lot of really cool stuff in driver development. We talk about carbon crown and sliding weight. I know I have an MP600 kicking around here somewhere, which I believe was the first driver that really ever had the adjustable weight track in it. So when people think of innovation and in the metal woods, Mizuno has done it in the past, but it really, there's never been this continuation, as to your point, right? And with this, there's it is this building block and building block and building block. Whereas before, you'd kind of do something and then you go away from it, and then you do something else and go away from it. Whereas that's really the whole change in development is what you're saying.
Yeah, it almost felt like development. You never want to say you were followers, but we were very much, I'd call it, reactionary to the industry, to kind of see what the driver market was doing, to see what we wanted to be 1 year versus the next, as opposed to really having basically an end goal at sight, and not to say the STZ is the last driver we'll ever make, because it's far from it, but to have a longer term vision of what makes a Mizuno driver, why is it different, what's unique about it, and what do we want to do as we work towards getting the levels of performance, levels of fitting, the levels of consistency that we want out of it. So yeah, it's different approach for us, but it brings in a lot of technologies. Like you talk about, Mizuno is not rare to have, it's not rare for a Mizuno to have something groundbreaking on the driver side, because we've done it historically.
Yeah, and I know I've got I happen to have a 200G here, which was again longer weight tracks, things that have developed and changed over time. again, for the viewers who are tuning into this, the 600, I don't have one right in front of my hand. It's one of those drivers still has a shaft into it. There's no adjustability adapter. So I got to rig this whole thing around. It doesn't work too much on camera, but with the Z, I mean, there are things that have really stayed. And one of the things is like the wave sole and starting to work more composite into the crown just to focus on missing MOI. But then the one thing I want to ask you about, because I think this is really important because, just like there's only one part of a tennis racket, and that's the thing that hits the ball, is the club face. And what really goes into developing that side of things? Because I mean, sure, there's prototyping involved, but the more that you build, the more that the factories produce, the more you get them into golfers' hands. I'm sure that design has to develop over time as you get back even like more, like just a greater data set from understanding what goes on with it.
You're exactly right. I mean, it's all about data. How much can we collect? How much information can we have to make us make the smartest, best product? And the face and how the overall club reacts along with the face is a huge part of that. If you watch the entire bracket, you'll see on center strikes, everybody performed really, really well. So because, we all know what we're doing as club engineers, as manufacturers, everybody's making good product. So it's what can you do to, and our big take is what can we do to make everything as close to reacting like a center strike as possible. And you saw that like in the finale, where when I remember when Ian showed the shot from the side where you could see the trajectories were extremely, extremely tight, and you didn't see much variance from that. And that's not to say that Matt hit every one of them dead in the center. He didn't, nobody does. But a lot of what we try to do is build a face that's going to react as consistently as possible. So you talked about like the waves channel on the bottom. The whole point of the wave sole on the bottom is to try to get the bottom of the face to react closer to how the center of the face reacts, and to go into a little bit of like engineering. If a driver has loft on it, so the face is kicked back from the target line. On the sole side, there's a smaller angle there. There's an acute angle, as opposed to on the top side, there's an obtuse angle, a bigger, greater than 90-degree angle. So naturally on that sole side, it's more reinforced. It's going to be more rigid. You're not going to get as much flex out of the face on the lower part of the head. So by utilizing that wave sole, what we're able to do is engage more of the head on the impact. So it takes some of the stress that would be absorbed by that, rigid area, and dissipate it or dampen it throughout the head. So allow that to flex a little bit, which allowed us to actually go thinner on the sole on the lower portion. So all of these different things working in tandem to make sure that the face is going to act as consistently as possible, regardless of impact location.
And it's very similar to with irons as well. When you think about, and I know we've had this discussion in the past about irons. I'm a big iron nerd in general, and the idea of the undercut cavity in the irons getting bigger and getting deeper, and then with the 921 forged actually going all the way through and then resealing it, so you have this greater flex. And there is this, to your point, this progression from model to model to model, when you're able to test the limits and go further and see how much data you can get from a huge like swath of golfers to know how far you can push it from the design perspective. And then, you do have to manufacture it in the end.
Right. Yeah, you see that a lot from us, where when we have a new technology or a new material, a lot of times our competitors shout about that material so much the first time you use it. With us, we almost get better with the material with age, as we understand it more, as we realize where we can push limits, as we have data, not only hit data from manufacturer, from players, but also, return data. So we can see, if it's breaking it, or mass production data where we can see yields within the factories of how often is it working, how often is it staying within tolerance, how often is the face flattening versus not flattening. All of these things are things that we take into account when we're making our next iteration, to say, okay, we push the limit of this material here, but we saw that we never had one crack on the high toe side. Maybe that means we were a little bit too thick on the high toe. We can always do some simulations to say, here's where we think we can actually thin areas out, but there's nothing that trumps actual real world data to show, okay, we know that we can press the limits here, so let's get more aggressive there, and let's do these different things to see how we can make the same material and get more out of it. And on top of that, utilize other parts of the head, utilize other manufacturing techniques techniques just to get better and better with each generation.
I think what you've done recently is, you've really created this steps of evolution and using technology where people start to, and I'm speaking to like my own perception from other consumers when I talk to people and talk to golfers all over the place. Most people can kind of assign a word to most manufacturers, and then going to mention other ones now at the moment. And people think of ping, they think of forgiving, they think of very high MOI, because they do. Their drivers have always been some of the most stable on the market. Then you have something like Cobra, where they're utilizing. This is why I'm not asking you to speak to this part of the show.
Right.
I'll take this on. But the Cobra, they've utilized like different manufacturing techniques, like the CNC milling of the face and the carbon wrap. And then you have Titleist, which is traditionally stuck with more of like a traditional kind of style, and now they've pushed it with materials with other drivers. So again, there's lots of companies that are doing different things, and now what you guys have really done is create this culture of technology and innovation, which is, I think, from the consumer perspective, is really showing out to people. And the other part of that as well, if we're talking about the TXG bracket, which for us is designed to do two things. One, it's designed to have some fun with the current level of product that's out there, and for us to, pick a bracket winner at the end. But it also really does showcase, to your point, which you said earlier, how close everything really is, especially when we're talking about center strike. So for you, as like leading a team of designers and engineers, it isn't about the center strike. Like at that point, we're all getting very close to the end goal of just complete maximization. And you've touched on it, is the idea of how can we continue to expand this for golfers? And we've seen this with irons, and we've seen it now with the the ES wedges, right? By being able to move more mass around and, trying, in that case, kind of messing around with some shaping, you get a lot more consistency to like the flight, not just with the window for a driver, which we just talked about from the bracket, but also from like spin and directional control and all of those things. And that's really what you're always working towards, right? Is just bringing everything closer and closer and closer.
That's exactly right. And you've seen it throughout, testing historically with the TXG stuff. It feels like oftentimes the things that are the most consistent are the things that win. And it makes a lot of sense in the fitting world of, if we're going to dial in specific launch parameters, we want you to get those launch parameters as often as possible. So, like Ping, I'll give Ping a lot of credit for what they do. They do a ton of great things in terms of making a very, very stable head. So because of that, they historically do really well. And you see really tight, consistent launch parameters because of that emphasis on moment of inertia. And the STZ, similar design philosophy behind that, where we utilize mass along that Z axis, which is the front to back axis, that's going to ultimately make it more stable, right? It's going to make it have a higher MOI. It's going to get you more consistent launch parameters. And that's where, hopefully with Mizuno, when you associate things with us, it's a little bit of nerdiness, because we do kind of use a lot of tech within our things in terms of not only how we produce them, but also even how we speak to them. You don't see us giving, flashy names to things. Ours is the STZ because the weight's along the Z axis, the STX because the weight's along the X axis. We call the face of SAT Beta Tie 2041. Like, we don't call it, hyperface or whatever you want to call it. Like, we like to talk to the technology behind it and then educate the consumer about what it does. And that's what I love about like you like educating on why you do a certain thing and what are the benefits of that. Yeah.
And well, thank you. Yeah. My goal is to talk to golfers, to bring them in to feel educated and to feel empowered. And for TXG, that's our goal, is to always inform golfers so you can go out and make good decisions when it comes to your own equipment. And not only that, but hopefully there's this evolution and this continuation, this passing on of knowledge and information. So if you're out playing with your friends and you notice, one of their wedges, they tend to chunk a lot, or they scull a lot, or, someone doesn't hit their 3-wood very well, or someone's driver isn't optimized very well, that there is this continuation and pass on of knowledge. I know I can think of many times where I've been out to a Muni, played with like random strangers, maybe not so much in the last couple of years. And I would play with people with adjustable drivers, and I would ask them, like, after a few holes, having them hit in a very consistent miss, and say, have you ever adjusted this thing in your life? And he goes, no, I got it as a gift, or I bought it on sale or whatever. I got it through a clear. Like, that's generally where a lot of consumers are, like, public players or a lot of golfers in general are going to buy equipment, and they're not really educated on it. And a couple clicks of a wrench later, they're like, wow, I didn't even know I could do that. And you're like, oh my goodness, it's right there on the driver, right? So it is, and speaking to adjustability, you've done some stuff in the past, and it wouldn't be me if I didn't ask you this kind of thing. Is you've got the 200G here, talking a couple of really cool weight channels, which I think is fast. I know mine only has one weight right now. I was testing it a longer length, so I was messing around with swing weight there. But with the STZ and the STX, there isn't any movable weight. But as a complete and utter golf equipment nerd, and for those people that know where you can go and find these things, the USGA conforming list recently posted another ST driver, which I believe is the STG. Could you give us a little information on that, and what could potentially be going on with that driver?
So I can give you a little information on that. So yes, you're right. It did pop up on the RNA USGA list just recently. And that was because we did a lot of tour testing with that, and it's gone really well. So yeah, to your point, when we launched the STZ and the STX, these clubs were a little bit different from the launch cycle that we've typically had. Because with the 200 range, we had the Z, the X, and the G. The G being the one you had in your hand, where the G for the adjustable center of gravity. The cool thing about the STG that potentially you'll see going forward is we brought back some of the adjustable weighting from the fitting world. It allows you a number of different things to dial in a lot of different launch parameters, spinning, more or less spin, more or less toe or heel weighting. And the cool thing about it is, if you look at it, comparing it to the one in your hand, again, there aren't samples out for other than I think there's maybe 3 or 4 of those heads exist globally. A lot of those are, there's some fine tunement or refinements, I'd say, to the current design. So everything that we do is somewhat iterative. Obviously there's technological advances as well, which we'll speak about at a later date, but there's some iterative improvements in terms of how the weighting works, how extremely placed the weights are, and what you can do because of the new placements of those. So yeah, look for something maybe coming up in the future. I can't quite tell you dates yet, but you're going to see something going forward.
That's cool. And I totally understand. I realize that, we can only talk about so much here, and, I've done my own digging. If anyone wants to check it out on Instagram, I've kind of extrapolated from a very 1D black or 2D black and white picture, what I think is going on there. So, but that it's one of those things where, from a fitting perspective, I think there's always levels for golfers to really look at when it comes to fine tuning. And you made a really good point, and that is exactly how TXG works when fitters work, and we're trying to always maximize the potential, even when that means a golfer's going to miss shots, because everybody misses shots. I think if we look now at the PGA Tour, for example, it's around 20%, maybe slightly less. I know 20% is always been the number that's kind of floated around. At one point, it was probably close to 50. How many players are using blades? You've obviously gone away in the 921 Tour set, completely eliminating a 3-iron, because there wasn't a single player, for example, on the PGA Tour using a 3-iron. And I think that should help golfers really figure out better ways to gap their bag through technology and I don't mean technology in clubs even. I'm talking about technology that's available from a fitting perspective. Working with launch monitors and working with data to help you figure out what's going to work best, because you can only put so many clubs in your bag, and you want those clubs to be optimized for you.
You're exactly right. I mean, I think the biggest tool out there right now is a good fitter and a launch monitor. And it's how do you maximize the 14 clubs you're allowed? It used to be back in the day, you'd go buy a box that had a driver, 3-wood, 5-wood, and then 8 irons, maybe a wedge and a putter. Now there's so many different options. I mean, we can just speak to, let's call it a 21-degree golf club. I mean, loft is typically the determining factor on how high a club's going to launch. It's a determining factor in generally how far it's going to go. Obviously, a 21-degree will go longer if the club's longer. It'll go shorter if the club's shorter, and it'll spin more if the center of gravity is deeper. It'll spin less if it's shallower. But from all there, at 21 degrees, you could have a JPX 4-iron, you could have an MP 3-iron, you could have a muscleback 3-iron, you could have a CLK hybrid, you could have a 7-wood. There's so many different ways to mask 21 degrees, and mask isn't the right word there, but so many ways to utilize 21 degrees that the only way to know how does 21 degrees work for me best is to look at what it's going to do after the ball's gone. So, and that's what's so cool about like the fitting world is, in general, a player will have lofts ranging from, call it 8 or 9 or 10, maybe even 12, depending on where the player is, 12 degrees up to 56 or 60 degrees. How do you make those lofts work for you? And that's what we're doing, is trying to develop different technologies to make different lofts do different things, and then work with a fitter, work with the TXG guys, understand what you need out of 21 degrees.
Yeah. And I think you make a really good point there, because I know one of the questions I get all the time, I do question and answers on Instagram, and we see it in the comments as well. Things like, I don't hit my 3-wood very well. What's something I should look at? A question I get very often is, I don't hit my 3-wood high enough. What shaft should I change? And I say, you don't need to change the shaft. You need to change the loft of your 3-wood, because you're just not obviously creating the optimal launch conditions for carry. I know I did my own test recently, not with a 3-wood, but with actually a 4-iron. I've tested. I got a basement full of golf clubs, but I've tested a whole bunch of different models with different shafts, just like single one-piece irons, all the way to hollow cavity irons. And I was actually more, even as someone who has access to technology and has these things and goes out to the golf course, but to really take it into like my own hitting bay with a launch monitor and looking at, this is my baseline. It's like good, better, best. And all of a sudden I was like, the best is actually like surprisingly better. Like I was expecting some better, but not that much better. And when I'm talking like 8 yards, better angle of descent, a little bit better height, all of these things. I'm like, this is shocking. Like I work in this space, and I felt that this one actually worked okay, because I'm using just my own objective times when I'm on the golf course. I got a good lie. I'm on a tee. I'm using this club. But then when I put it into practice, I'm like, okay, well, this actually doesn't work for me. And I think most golfers, they always think about their best shots, but sometimes you go to hit that, maybe it's a 5-iron and just goes whoop. You're like, okay, there is something that needs to change here to help. If you hit your longer club, say it is that 7, we hit it really well. Maybe there needs to be that bridging club. And that's where the technology and the fitting element really comes into play.
Totally. And what's funny to me, like, I grew up golfing. I've been golfing my whole life. And the 18-degree golf club and what you can do with an 18-degree golf club today versus 10 years ago is unbelievable. What I mean is, that's the traditional 5-wood loft. I always thought of a 5-wood as a golf club for a high handicapper, launches high, spins high. If you're into the wind, it goes nowhere. Or an 18 degrees is a 1 or 2 iron that's impossible to hit and hits a low bullet. Now what you can do with some of the modern 5-woods, there's some lower spinning 5-woods that launch high but don't spin a ton. And it's amazing how, like, to me, a 5-wood was like, I'm too good for a 5-wood. No, 5-wood's my favorite club in the bag right now because of what it can do. And that just shows how the engineering of clubs has changed. And the biggest thing is we've engineered variable playability within a given loft or within a given line. A 5-wood of one model might do something from a 5-wood of a different model. And until you get on the fitting side of it and really start to analyze what that is, you don't know if it's going to be good, better, or best. In some cases, a 5-wood went from bad to it went to incredible. So it's really neat to understand these things and how much variability there is.
Yeah. And I think that's something that's a big takeaway for people here. And, is that, you really want to experiment with your bag setup. I know we've kind of gone completely off the driver topic, and we're going to get back to it in just a moment, but it is about the lofts that are on your golf clubs and how they react to your bag and center of gravity and length and all of those different elements to really fine tune what's going to be optimized for yourself. And how that relates back to is when we're talking about the lowest lofted club beyond a putter, which is a driver, is that just because someone swings faster doesn't necessarily mean that they need the lowest loft possible. Just like, if someone swings slower, they need a higher loft, because it comes down to how that club is delivered into the ball. And, there's all kinds of different ways to do it. I know, like Keith Mitchell is one of the longest players on tour, but I don't believe he plays his at the lowest loft, does he?
He doesn't. He plays his, if anything, it might be actually a tick up in loft. So he's a player who likes to go aggressively at it, but he doesn't swing overly up on it. So he's a very level angle of attack. And because of that, he can play a bit more loft, even though he's got massive ball speed.
Yeah, I know. Like, I think he didn't win, but a couple of weeks ago, he was in one of the final groups there, and he's a masher of the golf ball. Like he really is like one of the longest players on tour. We saw it when he did win a couple of years ago now. I think he was the longest that week. And I think it's another one of those things to keep in mind for players, because when we're talking about driver loft, this is why the adjustability is so important. And I talked about like the older 600 there, right? Like the adjustability was in the back, but you still had to buy a designated loft on your driver. Whereas now, you can buy the driver, you're going to get dialed in, but middle of the summer, you want to get a little more run, you can lower that loft. You might not be achieving what could be considered optimal perfectly for a launch monitor, but for your conditions on that day or that course is really what's going to help. And I think that's one of the other cool elements of when we talk about modern technology and how it's able to help golfers is, sharing that knowledge, letting them self-assess, and letting them, really know how to tune their golf bag to play better golf.
You're totally right. And it's funny to watch different players. Like, to your point, optimal isn't always optimal. There's different ways to optimize. And I think Rory's the perfect example of somebody, obviously he grew up playing in Northern Ireland, but now he plays a lot of his golf, in the States, in Florida or whatever. And his ball flight is not necessarily optimized for Northern Ireland. I know he took a lot of grief one time saying how much he enjoys playing in the States, because he's learned that high ball flight, it's gonna do different things in different conditions. You work with somebody and you're fitting somebody who lives in Texas where it's super windy. Their natural window where they see the ball is going to be a little bit lower. Charles Howell's a perfect example of that. Charles Howell played at Oklahoma State, where obviously there's a lot of wind there, and things get moving. You watch his ball flight, and his window he's trying to hit is definitely different than the window that some other people try to hit, and that's because he knows a carry distance, and then he's optimized how much is going to run after that. And the modern adjustability in drivers allows you to have one club that can do multiple things. So, if it's a rainy day and you want a little bit more carry, you could crank that loft up a little bit. You could move that weight back a little bit. There's a couple things you could do to optimize carry, versus if it's flat out, if it's hard, you could do some things where you pull the center of gravity forward and really get more of a piercing ball flight, which is just something that's so cool that people I don't think take advantage of enough on the adjustable drivers.
I know Luke has mentioned it in the past with the G, which is the one, I mean, the other one is like noticing the spin characteristics and how different it was when he wanted to play in different conditions. I think it was like, he said it was like somewhere around 500 RPM from front to back for himself. And I think of him as someone who'd like very, very consistent. So he's able to really see that on a launch monitor and know that you're going to get those results. I would say where I am in Canada, which would be, I guess, in between the Northeast and the Midwest, we get a little bit of wind, but it's generally softer conditions. We don't have a lot of, like, I would say, sand capped golf courses around here where it dries out or gets baked out too much. And I know for me, I like to see a higher ball flight, but when summer kicks in, we've had a few weeks of not a lot of rain. I want that thing to get lower. I want it to fly, because it is gonna roll a lot more. And that's why one of the reasons why I happen to have one of these. I was lucky to get my hands on one of these before it became a bracket winner, and it is very much in rotation in my golf bag, because I love how forgiving it is. And that to me is the big thing. Is I used to like the really small drivers that I thought could work very well, but now I'm just like, I don't play that much. I want something that I can just really hit as hard as I can and see some consistent results.
It's amazing how different levels of players adopt different technologies too. I mean, when 460 drivers were first coming around, I'll never forget people being like, man, look at it, looks like a watermelon at the end of a stick. Better players, they're never going to play that. And you used to see, like, I mean, even not going too far back, you used to see some lower volume drivers being made by a lot of people. You don't see that too much anymore, just because high volume used to mean high spin, and that's not the case anymore. So now it's like you're getting bonus forgiveness from that extra volume and that extra MOI. So it can allow so many different levels of players to play clubs that just could speak to a high handicap or a low handicap.
Yeah, it really has. Homogenize isn't the word. but it really has changed the way the perspective is. And we look at like the younger players on tour. There's nobody out there who grew up playing persimmon anymore. Like the younger players, I'm not talking the guys who are still out there now. Like Phil's a perfect example of someone who, which is why I think it played very well into his advantage. He knew how to work the ball. He knew how to hit different shots at Kiowa, and that played into his strength versus some of the stronger players that prefer to just play one style of shot. And, you know, they got eaten up by the wind, or they didn't. They're the best players in the world. So like they know how to play shots, but they might not be very comfortable. Whereas Phil's out there, he's just like, he's working it every way because he knows how to do it. And he's done it a million times. And so that's always fascinating. But Chris, I want to say thank you for coming on today and talking drivers. Again, from us at TXG, congratulations on the bracket win. It was a fun one to watch all the way down to the end. And, you know, we're always going to see what's coming. I mean, for a lot of people, I encourage everyone to go out and get fit. It's very, very important. We want to stress that the bracket is one part of it. It is part to be entertaining, but also showcase what real world conditions are for a player day to day. Because Matt's, although he has a great swing, he's not a robot. None of us are robots, and we all have mishits. And that's where it really does help to just showcase different things. And, you know, this year, this came out on top.
It was awesome. One thing I love about it is just that there's equal weighting on a distant and an offline is one thing that I love about the bracket itself, is because, you know, if something's going 340 yards downrange, but 3 yards offline, you know, you think about the difference in that angle at 340 yards, it's like fractions of a degree off. Yet that's just as valuable. And that's where the fitting side comes into it. And that's what's so cool about the bracket. And that's where it values consistency. It values the how well it's fit to you as well. So, I mean, it was a blast for me to watch. It's funny. I got a buddy named Mitch who, if he's listening to this, he's always like, the first thing I would see is a text from Mitch saying, "Did you see the bracket? Did you see the bracket?" He's watching it more than I am, which is unbelievable. But we're so excited about it. And again, for Mizuno to, I don't want to say disprove some doubters, or actually, emerge as the winner and going through some hefty competition. We're very, very proud of it. And we're so excited about what the future holds, not just for Mizuno irons, but for Mizuno across the bag.
That's awesome. Again, thank you so much, Chris, for being here today. And, we always look forward to more. Thanks so much.
Anytime.